In this new series of videos on where Hamas's attack on Israel will lead to, I offer my advice to the state of Israel in part 1. In other parts of the series, I will offer my reasons for the position I'm taking in my advice to Israel. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. On Saturday, October 7, 2023, Hamas fighters crossed the border between Israel and Gaza into Israeli territory by land, sea, and air and slaughtered more than 1,400 Israeli Jews, mostly civilians, with a vast majority being women and children, including 30 Americans, with 13 Americans still missing, taking 100 to 150 hostages, including an unknown number of Americans. Since the start of the conflict, more than 2,700 Palestinian civilians have been killed, and the Israeli Defense Forces claim that they have killed 1,500 Hamas fighters. Israel responded by immediately sealing of the Gaza border, cutting off Gaza's electricity, fuel, water, and food in what is described as a total siege. Gaza's sole power plant has shut down because it has run out of fuel. Without electricity, the internet has been disrupted and the area's water pumping wells are likely to stop functioning without electricity. Last Thursday, October 12, 2023, the World Health Organization said that local hospitals in Gaza were at their breaking point with fuel due to run out, shortages of medical supplies, and a focus on life-saving emergency care, impacting those who require other essential health services. Since then, the situation has only worsened, with civilians who lost their homes in Israeli missile strikes sheltering in hospitals. Latest information is that in 24 hours, fuel will run out. Meanwhile, Israel has amassed 360,000 troops, including reservists, on the Gaza border in preparation for an imminent ground offensive. This is indicated by Israel's advice to about 1.5 million Palestinians in North Gaza to evacuate within 24 hours to the south of Gaza, a move which the United Nations said was impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. That 24 deadline is already passed. In response, former Hamas chief Khalid Mashal called for a day of rage across the Muslim world on Friday in support of the Palestinians and against the Israel strikes in Gaza. Mashal also urged those in neighboring countries to join the fight against Israel. Deliver a message through the squares and the streets, a message of anger that we are with Palestine, that we are with Gaza, that we are a part of this battle, Mashal said. The call for a day of rage by Mashal has led to large protests in the capitals of Iraq, Iran, Yemen, and Lebanon. Pro-Palestinian protests have also been held in Jordan, Japan, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Protests supporting Palestinians have also been held in cities in the United States, UK, and France. In a likely terrorist attack with a knife, a teacher was killed in France and 2 students seriously injured. In this series of videos, I am going to discuss this latest Israeli-Palestinian conflict and its likely consequences, such as its turning into a wider conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon and the involvement of other terrorist groups, possibly leading to the Third World War. Hezbollah is a Shiite Islamic Palestinian group, whereas Hamas is a Sunni Islamic Palestinian group. Iranians are Shias. Israel, the United States, and much of the world has known that Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, is the main sponsor of Hamas, Hezbollah, which is part of the government in Lebanon, and other terror groups in the region such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. In a speech in April 2023, Hossein Salami, leader of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which operates throughout the Middle East, stated about Iranian involvement in the West Bank. Israel is today being attacked by missiles from Syria, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip, and the flames of wrath are spreading from the West Bank. Invisible hands have armed the West Bank, and you now see modern automatic rifles and automatic weapons in the hands of the Palestinians. Thus, it seems Iran has Israel surrounded by its terror proxies. In an October 8, 2023 report, the Wall Street Journal revealed that Hezbollah hosted a meeting in Beirut on October 2, 2023, between Iran, Hamas, and other terrorist groups, finalizing preparations for the Hamas assault on Israel, which started on October 7, 2023. The report stated, Iran's border plan is to create a multi-front threat that can strangle Israel from all sides. Hezbollah and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine in the north, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank, according to the senior Hamas and Hezbollah members and an Iranian official. Iran has been setting aside other regional conflicts, such as its open feud with Saudi Arabia and Yemen, to devote the IRGC's foreign resources toward coordinating, financing, and arming militias antagonistic to Israel, including Hamas and Hezbollah, the senior Hamas and Hezbollah member said. Since the attack launched by Hamas, Hezbollah has been in brief skirmishes with Israel along the border. On October 8, 2023, Sunday, Hezbollah fired missiles and artillery into Israel, which killed one person. It said that it was in retaliation for a missile fired by Israel that killed a Reuters journalist and injured 6 others. Then on October 10 night, Hezbollah shot an anti-tank guided missile on an Israel armored vehicle and another on an Israeli army post. According to the Wall Street Journal report, Egypt has warned Israeli officials that a ground invasion into Gaza would trigger a military response from Hezbollah, opening up a second battlefront. Could these skirmishes escalate into a wider conflict as Israel launches a ground assault into Gaza? Hezbollah would be reluctant to open a full war front with Israel for fear that Christian militias in Lebanon would take advantage of the situation and try to force Hezbollah out of power in Lebanon. However, since Hezbollah receives most of the funding for its budget from Iran, Iran may force Hezbollah's hand into starting a second front in the war with Israel. Besides controlling Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, both based in Gaza, and Hezbollah based in Lebanon, Iran still supports Syria's government of Bashar al-Assad in the Syrian civil war, which could launch rocket, missile, or drone strikes on Israel under the guise of recovering the Golan Heights from Israel. It also sponsors several Israeli militias that could attack Israel through drone strikes. And as already mentioned, Iran's own IRGC operates throughout the Middle East. Here are the estimated relative strengths of the various terror groups sponsored by Iran. According to the Israel Defense Forces, Hamas has approximately 30,000 fighters under its command, about 1,500 of whom participated in the attack on Israel, most of whom appear to have been liquidated. Its weapons arsenal includes about 7,000 rockets and hundreds of guided missiles, with about 2,200 likely already used in the October 7 attack. It runs the government in Gaza and also operates in the Jewish part of Israel, the West Bank, and Lebanon. According to some estimates, Hamas receives about $30 million per month in support from Iran, and according to an interview by the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, it received about $70 million in support from Iran to develop missiles and other defense systems. Palestinian Islamic Jihad has about 15,000 fighters and about the same size of weapons arsenal as Hamas, with about 6,000 to 8,000 rockets. Hezbollah leader Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah has boasted that it has 100,000 highly trained fighters and more than 130,000 rockets and missiles in its arsenals. Hezbollah has been labeled the world's most heavily armed non-state actor by Washington, D.C. based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. All these groups have received about $1 billion in help from Iran. Then there are the powerful Houthis in Yemen, who, like the Iranians, are also Shiites. They have an estimated 200,000 fighters. The strength of the Houthis and the number of its fighters has grown because of their successes on the battlefield in recent years, especially after they proved to be equally capable opponents to the coalition led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, matching their sophisticated weapons and fighting skills. Thus, Iran has arrayed a formidable coalition of its proxies to fight Israel. Till now, most of the proxies launched rocket and terrorist attacks against Israel as individual organizations. But with Iran controlling the levers of all the organizations mentioned, it's possible that it may coerce all of them to launch attacks on Israel in a coordinated fashion. Thus, the Hamas attack on Israel could escalate into a wider conflict. Iran is unlikely to get directly involved in the conflict with Israel, but it could use its forces to support or even combine with the militias in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen as advisors and operate from those countries. According to the Wall Street Journal report, an Iranian official said that if Iran were attacked, it would respond with missile strikes on Israel from Lebanon, Yemen, and Iran, and send Yemen and Iraq, and send Iranian fighters into Israel from Syria to attack cities in the north and east of Israel. According to the report, Iran's backing of a coordinated group of Arab militias is ominous for Israel. Now, from the history of violence in the region, it seems evident to most nations that the Jews and the Palestinians as a people cannot live together. Therefore, the logical solution is to have two separate states carved out of the same territory, one for the Palestinians and the other for the Jews. Two-state solutions have been tried in the past through negotiations but have not succeeded. When a two-state solution has been proposed, it has in all cases been followed by violence against the Jews from the Arabs or Palestinians. To understand what is going on in Israel and the region, we must first understand the key players involved in the region in the present conflict and their likely motives. I have already described Iran's involvement in support for Hamas, Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Palestinian National Authority in the West Bank. Iran's motive for involvement is that it wants to be the clear leader of Islam and wants to unite Islam under its banner. The disadvantage Iran faces is that the two holiest sites of Islam, Mecca and Medina, are controlled by Saudi Arabia. The Al-Aqsa Mosque complex in Jerusalem is the third holiest site of Islam, which is administered by the Jerusalem Waqf, an organ of the Jordanian government. Religious authority on the site, on the other hand, is the responsibility of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, appointed by the Palestinian government. Iran wants control of the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex as it would bolster its claim to be the leader of Islam. After it controls the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock, it can then try to gain control of Mecca and Medina. That's why it arms so many proxies with the goal of making war on the Jews in Israel to just destroy the state of Israel. In this context, it should be noted that besides Iran's proxies, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Hamas, the other Arab states are in the process of making peace with Israel. The process began with the signing of the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty in Washington, D.C., United States on 26 March 1979, following the 1978 Camp David Accords. Then the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty came into effect in 1994. That process was taken further through the Abraham Accords, which are bilateral agreements on normalization of Arab-Israeli relations signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain on September 15, 2020. In December 2020, the Israel-Morocco Normalization Agreement was signed. After signing the Israel-Sudan Normalization Agreement in October, on January 6, 2021, the government of Sudan signed the Abraham Accords Declaration in Khartoum. Discussion on the process of full normalization of relations are ongoing. The negotiations between Saudi Arabia and Israel for normalization of relations were progressing before the Hamas attack on Israel. The attack may have delayed the process but will likely resume after the dust settles. Thus, most of the rest of the Arab nations that are not pursuing normalization of relations with Israel are those that are experiencing internal instability and turmoil. It seems the Palestinian Israeli issue is on the back burner for most of those who have normalized relations with Israel. The only ones keenly interested in the issue are Iran and Turkey. Turkey's President Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan called Israeli siege and bombing of Gaza a disproportionate response amounting to a massacre. Turkey has offered to mediate in the dispute, but beyond that, Turkey does not appear to be involved in arming any terror groups to destroy Israel. Egypt or any neighboring Arab nation does not want to allow Gaza Palestinians to enter as refugees. From 75 years of experience with Palestinian refugees, most Arab nations have concluded that they can only be incalculable trouble for them. In Jordan, Arafat's group tried to assassinate King Hussein and take over the government. He nearly succeeded. With American and British help, King Hussein succeeded in booting Arafat and his Palestinian militia out of the country. They went to Lebanon and destroyed the country. This explains why Iran is the main sponsor of Islamic terrorism in the world. It wants to become the go-to leader of Islam, and controlling the Islamic holy places in Jerusalem is a critical piece of its strategy and motive. Another key player in the region hidden from the world is Germany. Its intervention in the region is driven by hatred of the Jews. After the Holocaust, the Jews hunted the Nazis all over the world for decades to bring as many as they could to justice. They also pursued compensation for looting Jewish assets during the Second World War. The Germans seek destruction of the Jews as they have sought destruction of all people who fought them in the First and Second World Wars. I am familiar with their attempts because I am a former Sikh by faith from the Punjab state of India. They have targeted the Sikhs also for destruction because they fought the Germans in both world wars as part of the British Indian armies. I will trace the history of the Arab-Jewish conflicts in the Holy Land since the end of World War II from 1922 onwards, when the British obtained the mandate for the land known as Palestine. But briefly, this is how the Germans have been involved in the region. In November 1947, when the UN partitioned the land between Jews and Arabs, the Arab nations of Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon attacked Israel. The Israeli Jews won miraculously, and many Arabs living in the land who would later begin calling themselves Palestinians fled as refugees to the Arab countries. Wherever they fled, they set up Palestine liberation organizations. Such movements began operating from Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan. But the rulers of each of the countries controlled their funding and activities. Sometimes they stopped funding them if other foreign policy interests required it. The Germans saw an opportunity in this situation. They decided to set up an organization beholden to them, help fund it, and invite Palestinians in all these countries to join this one organization. The aim was to punish the Jews in Israel and their American and British supporters. They finally selected the highly energetic Yasser Arafat, who was better educated as a civil engineer, a good fundraiser, and inclined to violence and killing to achieve his ends, as their man to head the organization. I will briefly trace Yasser Arafat's German connection and the history of the movement led by him in later videos. The incentives the Germans offer to the leader they select is to make him king or chief ruler. That was the incentive offered to Arafat. Even Saddam Hussein of Iraq and Idi Amin of Uganda were their men. They succeeded in making them rulers of their countries. They promised to make Arafat the king of Israel, advising him in the meantime to try and conquer Jordan. He nearly succeeded. Then he nearly succeeded in Lebanon until the Israelis forced him out of there. But the German mass creators Yitzhak Rabin, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Shimon Peres, the Foreign Minister of Israel, orchestrated the Oslo Accords that finally allowed Arafat to settle in Israel, which he had not been allowed before as a designated terrorist, and rule the Palestinians as head of the PNA. I will provide evidence for all this in later videos. I, as a Sikh and Punjabi, am familiar with this German tactic. They want to destroy us. They promised one of us, the former Chief Minister of Punjab, Prakash Singh Badal, to make him King of Punjab. He first had to meet their hurdle qualification, which was to murder a person of British descent, which he did. Then he was to demonstrate his loyalty to them by doing what he was told to do. He also to demonstrate his ability to control his people by eliminating all opposition to his rule. Their motive was to have him murder any of his people that opposed him politically in any way. That's how they tricked him to murder tens of thousands of Punjabi youths to demonstrate that he could control the territory. That's how they got some revenge on the Punjabis and Sikhs. Idi Amin also ministered hundreds of thousands of his countrymen, also murdered hundreds of thousands of his countrymen. The Germans got their revenge on Ugandans for fighting against them in the Second World War as part of the British African armies. In the case of Arafat, the goal was to establish him as ruler, to use his people to destroy the Jews. The original purpose for creating the Palestine Liberation Organization under Arafat was to destroy Israel. That purpose has not changed. It is a part of Hamas'S charter. The incentive for Palestinians who never make peace with Israeli Jews and keep killing some through terrorism is that the Germans will offer control of the land to Palestinians. That's why the Palestinians have always rejected any two-state solutions or any negotiated settlements with Israel. The Germans did not want them to make peace with Israel because the Palestinians hoped to conquer the Jews with German help, destroy them, and rule the land themselves. Till the Yom Kippur War of 1973 between Jews and Arabs, the Arabs had dreams of conquering the Jews and controlling the land as Arab land. But after Egypt made peace with Israel, the goal took a back seat for them, and only the Palestinians kept the dream alive with full secret German support. Another German tactic to fight their enemies needs to be exposed. Rabin had to negotiate the Oslo Accord so that Arafat could be allowed into Israel and rule the Palestinians. After that, since Arafat headed the Palestinian government, he could not openly support terrorism against the Jews. But the Germans want violence and killing against the Jews to never stop. For that purpose, another organization dedicated to terrorism and violence had to be created or supported. That is how Hamas became the chief arm of terrorism against the Jews after Arafat was allowed into Israel. While the Palestinian National Authority criticizes terrorism, Hamas is totally dedicated to it. The purpose in creating PIJ is the same. While Hamas rules Gaza and may at some future time strategically see fit to criticize violence, another organization, the PIJ would be ready to continue the violence. Obviously, that time has not yet come because Hamas has carried out the latest attack on Israel. As context for my advice, we must also consider another Islamic practice. Wherever Muslim rulers conquer, they destroy the physical places of worship of the people they encounter and either convert the buildings into mosques or erect mosques to replace the destroyed buildings. The Mughal rulers of India practiced this, destroying some Hindu temples and erecting mosques in their place or converting the temples into mosques. They were merely following the mandate in their faith to convert the world to religion by sword where necessary. To convert the world to religion, they have to destroy the worship practices of other religions and replace them with Islamic places of worship and force the people to follow Islamic worship practices. The Narendra Modi government of India has recognized these past practices of Mughals and has demolished some mosques and replaced them with Hindu temples. The story of the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the same. Prophet Muhammad was never in Jerusalem. I provided evidence of this in my June 7, 2021 video titled Part 3, A Radical Solution for the Israel-Palestinian Conflict and an Appeal to All Muslims. The caliphs who conquered Jerusalem were merely following the tenet of their faith to destroy the worship practices of other religions and erect Muslim worship places in the holy place of those religions. That's how the Al-Aqsa Mosque was finally built in the most holy site of the Jews and Christians. Muslims have absolutely no claim to the site. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock do not belong to that site. Finally, I would like to offer an example when someone pushes back at Islam, how their leaders react. Again, Narendra Modi has given us a perfect example for our day. Though I despise the man because he has sold himself to do evil against his own countrymen to destroy the Sikhs and Punjabis in India so that he and his Gujarati people can be financially rewarded by them, he has shown how Islamic clerics begin singing a different tune when someone pushes back hard at them and puts their life in jeopardy because of their aggressive behavior. Here is a YouTube video in which a Muslim cleric is responding to questions about the Hamas attack in Israel. This is www.youtube.com/watch?MVNDA0Q3KWO. I will roughly translate just a few minutes of the video. Hamas is doing jihad, it says, but Hamas does not know what jihad is. Jihad is done for justice and humanitarianism. Hamas has carried out a terrorist act. Jihad is between two nations, but they are a united country in Palestine. I understand Hamas has support from all Muslims because of common religion and humanitarianism. I want to talk about Indian Muslims who support Pakistan or Hamas. If they go to Israel, will Hamas welcome them as fellow devotees of Islam? No, they will kill them. They consider us as Indians and we are showing to the world that we are Muslims. Now, jihad is a religious war, but what Hamas has done is not a religious war. In jihad, you can't imprison females, the elderly, children, or guests in hotels. But Hamas is stripping Jewish women naked, taking them in trucks. The more honor that Islam has given to women is not given to them in any other religion. I feel ashamed of what is being done in the name of Islam. Now, taking over all religious places and converting them into Islamic worship places is not right. Modi is supporting Israel because it gives us weapons like Russia to defend ourselves. Palestinians have given us nothing. When we Indians meet Muslims, they shoot us dead as in Kashmir. So country is more important than religion. One has to be faithful to one's country. Islam has not given us permission to kill innocent people. So Modi has pushed back against Muslims in India and has scared them. They feel their lives are under threat. For self-preservation, they are now singing a different tune. I am not criticizing the Muslim cleric for the views he has expressed, but most Muslims interpret their religion differently. When they see they have the strength, they interpret jihad to mean converting all others to Islam, if need be by the sword and forcing them to worship Allah. There is also no doubt in anyone's mind that women are treated worse in Islam than in any other religion. But as far as I am concerned, this cleric is a fellow Indian and we should treat each other with mutual respect and follow our own faiths and not intrude into or obstruct anyone else's faith. That way we can live peacefully with one another. Now, in my ebooks, Which Religion is True and Hinduism, Sikhism and Islam Are These God's Religions, available free on my religion website www.churchofgodmessage.com, I have proved that Islam is the devil's religion, originated to drive hatred among Muslims against the Jews and Christians. Because of my other videos on the subject, I believe many of the Muslim world are beginning to realize that their religion is a false religion and have changed their attitude about other people's religions. Therefore, there is no need for Jews and Christians to be afraid of Muslims and should do what is right. With this background, I can now offer my advice to Israel and America on how to deal with the Hamas attack. 1. After 75 years of dealing with Arab and then Palestinian violence and atrocities with the aim of destroying all the Jews, Israelis should seek a final solution to the problem such that the problem never arises in its history. On a per 100,000 population basis, the Hamas attack was far worse than the 9/11 attack in America. Number 2. We know that Hamas is acting on behalf of Iran this time. They are also beholden to the Germans. They will never agree to peace with the Jews, and their terrorism and killings will not cease. The only solution is to destroy the organization completely. Hamas as an organization should no longer exist. That means killing all its fighters and all its leaders, and not only the top leaders. PIJ is just another head of the same monster, that is Palestinian Islamic Jihad. All the fighters and leaders of that organization should also be exterminated. Iran has claimed that it has armed allies in the West Bank. All of them should be liquidated as well. Then let new leadership take their place with the understanding that they too will be liquidated if they don't recognize Israel's right to exist in peace with them. Now, after 75 years of atrocities, time for justice has finally come. It's not a time for dealing lightly with Palestinians. They should be brought to justice for being used as hammers by other people to hammer the Jews, Americans, and the British so that they can control and rule the entire land. It's possible Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies might join the fight with Israel in support of Hamas. All should receive the same treatment as Hamas. Now, when the appropriate time comes, all Palestinians will be dealt with for all the atrocities committed by them against the women, British, and Jewish people over the past 70 years. After Israel liquidates Hamas, it must impose a two-state solution. Israel should not wait for the Palestinians to accept the solution. The Palestinians must accept the state offered to them. It should no longer be a matter of choice. They must live in the sovereign state offered to them and govern themselves. In this regard, I have to caution the Jews about God's warning to them in Hosea 5 verse 10. The princes of Judah were like them that removed the land, therefore I will pour out my wrath upon them like water. Now Israel must fairly divide the land, giving the Palestinians a viable country. Otherwise, God warns he will pour out his wrath on the Jews like water. The reason the Palestinians have a right to their own country in the land is that both people came to the land at the same time. I will provide evidence that the Palestinians are not descendants of the original inhabitants of the land. In God's sight, they have a right to the land until He later decides to give the land entirely to the descendants of the tribes of Israel. Till then, Palestinians must have their own country in the same land. If the Palestinians do not accept the solution, it must be imposed on them. Move them to their own country and then move away. Let them govern themselves. Number 6. Jews should control and live in Old Jerusalem. God has prophesied that the Jews and Israelites will live in Israel and control and live in the entire holy city, which is Old Jerusalem or East Jerusalem. It is their holy city. Muslims don't allow those of any other religion to establish worship practices in Mecca and Medina. Now, despite the heaviest odds, God has established the Jews in the land of Israel as a country and given them control of Jerusalem. But at present, Gentiles or non-Jews, meaning the Palestinians, tread the holy city. According to God's will as revealed in the Bible, only Jews and Israelites should occupy and live in the holy city. Palestinians living in Old Jerusalem must sell their properties to Israel, but they must be fairly compensated. It should be considered prime real estate, and the Palestinians living it should be handsomely compensated at 2 to 3 times the current values of the at least, so that they are fully satisfied. They should be allotted residences vacated by Jews in the new country. Palestine or new, much better quality residents should be developed by Israel for them to own, so that their lot actually improves, and they are much better off by giving up their properties in East Jerusalem. Israelite countries, that is America, British Commonwealth nations, France, Ireland, Switzerland, Scandinavian, and Benelux countries, should help Israel bear this grudge, bear this huge additional cost. The purpose is to leave the Palestinians, who will be selling their properties in the whole city, much better off. In addition, the Palestinians should be helped to develop a prosperous country. US, British Commonwealth nations, and Israel should help them do so. Number 7. Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock. As explained, there is nothing tying Muhammad to the Temple Mount site. The two mosques were constructed to legitimate their exclusive claim to the Temple Mount. But as shown earlier, the claim is illegitimate. Iran or any other Muslim nation has no right in the Temple Mount. It belongs to the Jews and other descendants of Israel. If the Jews wish to construct a temple on any area of the Temple Mount, they may do so, as it is holy ground of the God of the Bible. They can then institute any worship practice they desire. For this purpose, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock must be removed from their location on the Temple Mount. Since Jordan is responsible for the upkeep of the mosques, if it wishes to retain the two mosques rather than raze them to the ground to make space for the Jewish temple or altar, Jews in Israel, with the help of other Israelite countries, should bear the cost of removing both structures and setting them up at locations at Jordan's crossing. For example, the two mosques could be removed and set up in an area just east of the Jordan River or at Amman by creating a replica of the Temple Mount area. I counsel Palestinians and Muslims not to call this solution as crusader solution and resort to unnecessary protests and violence. Palestinians will be very handsomely compensated for their properties in Old Jerusalem. Muslims should recognize the history and practices of Muslim conquerors to raise the worship places of other religions and erect mosques and masjids in their place. That's what happened at the Temple Mount. Jews and Christians in Israel have the only legitimate right to the Temple Mount and their other holy places. I believe that the time has come to implement all the advice I have offered to Israel. In future videos in this series, I will explain the prophecies concerning God's hand in establishing the Jews in the Holy Land in the end time, and who are the Palestinians as a people, history of the two-state solutions offered in the past, and the wars fought by the Arabs and Palestinians to prevent the Jews from establishing their nation, Yasser Arafat's Germans connection, and other related issues. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and how Bible prophecies are playing an important role in world affairs, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini to view and get information on the latest videos.